about 12,000 years, human beings have been cultivating land to sustain themselves. As populations grew, farming methods had to adapt to accommodate a greater need for food. By the late 1800s, refrigeration and pasteurization were invented to make food last longer and stay safer for consumption. As the population in the U.S., in particular, has expanded, the demand for readily available, cheap food has intensified. However, this demand spurred a new kind of growth. Instead of the creation of more family farms to fill this demand, large-scale industrialized farms replaced them and were able to produce more food with less cost. This trend led to the decrease in number of Americans who owned or worked on farms, but was able to supply a rapidly increasing amount of food. In the early 1900s, about 1 in 5 people lived on farms, whereas today only about 1 in 100 do. The number of farms also decreased. Today, there are approximately 3.6 million less farms than there were at the beginning of the 20th century.
The goal of factory farming is to produce as much product as possible, even if it means destroying the environment, abusing animals, and endangering human health. To date, approximately 260 million acres of forest were destroyed and removed to become land for factory farms. Also, industrial farming accounts for half the annual water usage in America because of the excessive number of animals that need access to water. In addition to being a waste of water, factory farms contaminate many sources of human drinking water. Cattle alone produce 1 billion tons of waste, and the places where it is disposed of often leak or overflow into previously viable drinking sources. Over 10 billion farm animals are killed each year and are only allowed to live a small percentage of their natural lifespan. Cows, for example, would normally live up to 25 years, but are slaughtered at the age of 3 or 4. During their short life, they are constantly fed antibiotics and hormones in order to prevent disease and increase growth. Therefore, when people eat this meat, they are ingesting the hormones and antibiotics that were fed to the cows. The use of antibiotics results in antibiotic-resistant bacteria, which makes illness more common in livestock and humans. Although the antibiotics do prevent the spread of disease among the livestock to some extent, the animals' living conditions contribute to their short lifespans. Chickens are kept in enclosures 18 inches wide, while their wingspan is generally 32 inches wide. Calves are often kept in small crates for 12 to 16 weeks to be paired for slaughter as veal. The animals that become sick or injured before the scheduled slaughter are given no medical aid and are slaughtered as soon as possible. Although the majority of the livestock are bred to be slaughtered, the chickens and cows that produce eggs and milk are treated just as horribly. Chickens are fed hormones to produce more eggs than they would naturally and are forced to live in extremely unsanitary conditions. Their cages are rarely cleaned, so they have to live in their own feces. Cows bred to produce milk are fed hormones, which makes their milk have 3 times the amount of protein and fat than it naturally would. That's 15% more protein and fat than what's in human milk. They are fed these hormones so calves can grow to be a 300-pound cow quickly. However, this modified milk is also sold for human ingestion, which affects human growth and hormone levels.
In recent years, there has been a backlash against industrial farming as the only option for produce. Many people who understand the true cost of factory-farmed food are opting to get their food from different resources. They understand that the short-term economic savings of industrial farming are not worth the devastating long-term consequences. Organic farming and community-supported agriculture are both examples of grassroots agrarian movements that started in response to industrial farming. Industrial farming could not have risen to where it is today without the legislative support by the federal government. The food industry has a long history of buying influence in politics. The Center for Public Integrity estimates that between 1987 and 1996, agribusiness contributed more than $41 million to the political campaigns of federal lawmakers. Right now, over 3/4 of industrial farms operate with no state environmental laws governing them. The state of California, for example, provided factory farms with a 20-year waiver that made water pollution laws not apply to them, and 30 years ago, exempted farm equipment from smog restriction laws. That's why it is essential that the federal government creates laws to restrict factory farms and hold them accountable for their damage to the environment. In 2002, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency passed regulations that control how CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, dispose of animal waste. Unfortunately, these regulations are limited and filled with loopholes. The Animal Welfare Act is another example of an ineffective law because it excludes farm animals from its protection. If the conditions of factory farms are to change, lawmakers are going to have to realize that their influence is what perpetuates this industry.
We're protecting our earth, our soil, our employees. It can be done on a smaller scale. From there, we can take it up to a bigger scale. I've been in it since 1985, and there's a lot more products out there now that can help the organic farmer. Where at the very beginning it was kind of on the real scarce products, but now there's all the bio industry stuff, and so there's a lot more materials now that can help the farmer. So it can be done on a bigger scale now.
Over the past 100 years, agriculture has evolved from independent farms run by families to enormous facilities designed to systematically slaughter livestock and harvest crops in order to maximize profit and minimize cost. In the process, the well-being of animals and quality of food produced is severely compromised. These unethical and unhealthy agricultural practices continue today because of few government regulations or restrictions. While every state has laws that protect animals from abuse, many of these state laws purposely do not apply to the livestock, because then virtually every factory farm would be liable for animal abuse charges. In addition, the factory farms are not required to report animals infected with disease to the government, which is why there are constant E. coli breakouts and other dangerous diseases rampant in the meat supply. Currently, the government also does not regulate the usage of antibiotics and hormones, so the factory farms can decide for themselves how much they use, based solely on making the most profit. The lack of checks and balances in this system allow industrial farming to expand and produce at unsustainable levels, with great sacrifice of safety and quality as the price. If agriculture in the United States is to continue, a healthier balance between profit and quality will have to be negotiated by farmers and politicians. An industry as unsustainable as industrial farming will have to find the means to change before it inevitably caves in on itself, leaving behind the residual consequences of its short-sightedness.
And I don't want to eat no hands, not even every now and then. I just want to let all the little chickens be.